Shabbat Shalom. This is the first Shabbat of 2023. And we're looking today at Parashat Vayechi. This parashat completes Sefer Bereshit. Bereshit, of course, is the first book of the Torah. It narrates God's creation of the world and an account of early humanity. It describes the process by which, through the righteous line of Seth, the family of Abraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov, Rachel and Leah became the founders of the nation of Israel. The first part of Bereshit is not a scientific précis, but the modus operandi for God to ascribe to himself the role of creator of the universe and of humanity. This leads us through Noah to Abraham and the creation of God's one and only people, and ultimately to the creation of his nation, Israel. Please note that Hashem does not attempt to explain the creation or the process of it in all its fullness. We wouldn't understand it if he had. But these details are unnecessary to his purpose. Very few mitzvot, commandments, or mishpatim, laws, are actually written in the first Sefer of the Torah. However, Bereshit offers significant insights and instruction into the commandments already given by God and delineated later in the books of the Torah. Such an insight is contained in Parashat Vayechi, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The name of this Parashat, Vayechi, means he lived, but as usual, as we're coming to expect, it is at the very end of Yaakov's life, much like Sarah. If we read obituaries or tombstones, birth and death are possibly all that we know about a person. Born 19-something, died 20-something. And yet what interests us the most is really what happens in between. If all one can say about a person is when they were born and when they died, it tells us nothing about who that person really is, his or her life, loves, failures, successes, and accomplishments. Perhaps what we want to know most is this: did the person make a difference to those around him or her? When it comes to Yaakov, renamed Yisrael by God, we know nearly everything about his birth and his death, as well as the life that he lived in between. Some events were joyous, some were bitter, but we can say with certainty, Ma'aseh avot simon labanim, the deeds of ancestors have a message for their children. And so we ask these questions. What was Yaakov's life between birth and death? What did he accomplish for future generations? And what did he pass on to his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and so on, from his parents and his grandparents? One might say that Yaakov spent the best years of his life in Egypt. During those last 17 years, Torah tells us not that he dwelt, but that he lived. After all the storms and the stresses of his 130 years, Yaakov now had the peace in which to enjoy his children and his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, all living nearby. But this is only part of the answer. One of the Targumim adds another dimension. It paraphrases the verse in these words, "And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen, and they built themselves schools of study and halls of learning in the land of Goshen." Well, that isn't what it says in the Torah, but undoubtedly it is true. Egypt became home, but this Targum suggests that Yaakov himself was able to use his time constructively and for good purpose. Before one retires, he or she should plan a program of activity which will stretch the mind and possibly the body as well through intellectual and spiritual and maybe physical challenge. In those last years of his life, Yisrael had both the time and the opportunity to pass along all that he had learned to those coming after him, his heirs. And as all good Jews know, no matter what else one is doing, he or she can always do a little teaching on the side. Popular saying that I heard as a child from our shtetl years, especially in Russia. If I was the Tsar, I would be richer than the Tsar. I would do a little teaching on the side. Or it was also said, if I was Rothschild, I would be richer than Rothschild. I would do a little teaching on the side. There in Egypt, we read that Yaakov blessed his children. His initial remarks are not so much in the form of blessing as they are a prophetic assessment of each son's character and an indication of that son's future and the future of the tribe that he fathers. Each son also received a blessing, as indicated in verse 28, though the actual words of the blessings are not recorded here. Parents, over the years, usually, hopefully, come to know their children well. Pardon me. Unlike Yisrael, we may never speak this sort of blessing over them, but I'm sure every godly parent prays that his or her child or children will receive God's direction and blessing according to that child's personal character and his needs or her needs. There is, of course, a traditional blessing for Shabbat, that sons may be like Ephraim and Manasseh, and daughters like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. But each parent may hope for an Ephraim rather than a Manasseh, and for a Sarah rather than a Leah. Children may be jealous or envious of one another because one may be perceived to have more than another, a lesson seen in our patriarchs' lives, and a reminder to us that it's unwise for parents to make distinctions between children. Not necessarily favoritism, but it's also difficult not to do this because of the individual character of the children. When it comes to the spiritual and emotional endowment that comes from a parent, it is a wise child who will see that choices make destinies. They may change destinies. Yisrael, our patriarch, gave a personal message to each of his sons, summing up their character and hinting prophetically at their future. As we would expect, Joseph received the most extensive blessing. Israel used the singular when speaking to Joseph, referring to him as your father, as if he only had one son. He says, the blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my progenitors. They shall be on the head of Joseph. Blessings bestowed by him upon his children were more valuable than those bestowed by Abraham and Yitzchak. Why? He was speaking of the blessings of your father as the blessings your father received, making the blessing upon Joseph cumulative. Abraham was promised the land of Israel. Yitzchak was promised a broader territory, all these lands. And so, what are the blessings of Yisrael? It was customary before the death of a patriarch for him to bless his children. Israel blessed each of his sons, who, of course, by now would have been elderly, fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers themselves. But these remarks are different. They are prophetic utterances indicating God's interaction in Yisrael's efforts to draw his sons together for one final statement of purpose and direction. Many of these blessings are not easy to interpret, but they are certainly viewed as prophetic. They are from God. They are recorded in the Torah in a difficult, unusual Hebrew. Because of the challenges attending interpretation, our sages have thought long and hard about the interpretation of these statements. According to Rashi, almost all of the blessings, at least to some extent, deal with the land of Israel. For example, Yehuda is told that the portion of his descendants will be remarkably fertile. A similar blessing is given to Asher. Zebulon discovers that the area his descendants will inherit will be along the shoreline. It is revealed to Shimeon and Levi that their descendants will not receive typical portions, but will be dispersed among the other tribes. Our parasha begins at the closing of Yisrael's blessing over Joseph. Your father's blessings exceed the blessings of my parents, extending to the boundaries of the heights of the world. May they be for Joseph's head, for the brow of the elect of his brothers. Yaakov attested to Joseph's faithfulness and righteousness when he gave Joseph a double portion of blessing and doubled the inheritance of his brothers, naming Joseph's sons as equal heirs with them. That, of course, has already been done. Pharaoh and others bowed before the God of Joseph because of his testimony as a wise and righteous man who always credited God with his accomplishments. We know more about Joseph's life than that of any other human being in the scriptures, and no negative word is spoken of the mature Yosef. The blessing given to Yosef is beyond his tribal blessing, as his sons have now become tribal leaders in their own right. The blessing is a very difficult one to translate. The first portion of the passage is consistent with the logic of Rashi's interpretation. Yisrael explained to Yosef that the blessing he had received from God exceeded the blessing that his father Yitzchak or his grandfather Avraham had received. But the passage is not clear as to the manner in which Yaakov's blessing exceeded those of the earlier patriarchs. Because Rashi assumed that Yisrael's focus is upon the land, he explains the blessing in terms of what is being received, extending to the boundaries of the heights of the world. Rashi further suggests that we compare these blessings to those Yisrael himself received from God regarding the land of promise. God spoke to Avraham after his initial separation from Lot. He told Avraham to look in every direction, promising Avraham he would receive all the land he saw. This blessing, although extensive, was limited, implying that Avraham's descendants would receive a specific portion of land. When God spoke to Yitzchak during a famine, he told Yitzchak that he should not seek refuge in Egypt, but should remain in the land. And God added that Yitzchak's descendants would receive these lands, explaining that these lands are the portion promised to Abraham. Yitzchak's blessing was essentially a reiteration of the blessing given to Abraham. If we compare these blessings with the promises God gave to Yisrael, what do we find? We know that when Yaakov left his home to travel to Haran, he had a dream in which he saw a ladder that extended into the heavens. Messengers of God ascended and descended the ladder, and God was at the top of the ladder. God spoke directly to Yaakov, explaining that his descendants would be as numerous as the dust of the earth. He told Yaakov that these descendants would spread out in all directions, taking possession of the land with no limits or boundaries mentioned, indicating that the land of Israel would have no specific limits. With this in mind, our passage takes on greater significance. Israel told Yosef that the blessings he received regarding the land were more extensive than those received by Avraham and Yitzchak. And from our comparison, this does seem to be the case. Avraham and Yitzchak were promised a land with specific boundaries for their family, while Yisrael, father of a nation, was promised a land extending to the boundaries of the heights of the world. In other words, God promised that the land of Yisrael's descendants would extend to the furthest reaches they could occupy, to the ends of the earth. This interpretation, of course, invites an obvious question. If God promised Avraham and Yitzchak a land with specific boundaries, and Yisrael a portion not restricted by specific boundaries, the blessings do not seem to be consistent. Avraham and Yitzchak were promised a specific piece of property. On the other hand, Yisrael was told that the land promised to his descendants would have no boundaries. Does this mean that God was revising or replacing the promise given to Avraham and Yitzchak? Is there some way to reconcile the promise given to Yisrael with the earlier promises given to Avraham and Yitzchak? Let's begin by rephrasing the statement that we've just made. Avraham and Yitzchak were told that the land which God was bestowing upon them had specific boundaries. Yisrael was told that the land of Israel, the land which his descendants would ultimately inherit, have no specific boundaries, but extends to whatever territory Bnei Yisrael will occupy. Is it possible that these descriptions can be reconciled? What are the implications for the present and the future? In the closing section of his Mishnah Torah, the Rambam explains that any land captured by the Jewish people is regarded as part of the land of Israel, just as with most conquests of land by any nation. However, it was his opinion that the conquest must be authorized by the High Court and conducted under the auspices of the King of Israel. Remember, he's writing at a time when we did not control the destiny of any piece of land, but were mostly exiles in other people's lands. Earlier in the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides commented that although the boundaries of the land of Israel can be extended through conquest, this can only take place after Canaan was completely conquered. So, first Israel must conquer the land promised to Abraham and Yitzchak, and after this was accomplished, any further conquest would be incorporated into the land of Israel. Rambam suggests that because of this rule, lands captured by King David did not have the normative sanctity of the rest of the land of Israel. David captured additional territory before all of the land of Canaan had been conquered, and so the Rambam suggests that these were not equal to other portions of the land of Israel. And of course, part of that would have been Jerusalem. If we agree with this perspective, then the land of Canaan is the primary territory of the land of Israel, and other territory can be incorporated as an extension of the primary land. What do we know? Hashem promised Abraham and Yitzchak the entire land of Canaan, and this promise was never rescinded or revised. The land of Canaan is the primary territory of the land of Israel. God did not contravene or contradict this promise in his blessing to Yisrael. But he did tell Yisrael that the land of Israel would not be limited to the primary territory promised to his father and his grandfather. Instead, the land would be extended beyond this territory through conquest after the primary territory was controlled by the Bnei Yisrael. Pardon me. This parsha provides important principles regarding the sanctity of the land of Israel, principles which were incorporated into the Torah's legal system given by God through Moshe hundreds of years later. The land of Canaan may also be seen as a somewhat generic term. Canaan, the son of Ham, was the ancestor of tribes that occupied all the territory from Sidon or Hamath in the north, and to Gaza in the southwest, and Lasha in the southeast. This area is roughly that of modern-day Israel, Lebanon, western Jordan, and western Syria. Canaan's descendants, according to the scriptures, included Sidonians, Hittites, children of Heth, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. None of these people exist today. What are the implications? God promised Abraham, Bereshit 15:18, to your descendants I give this land, from the land of Egypt, the Nile, to the great river, the Euphrates. It's a huge territory which Israel has never actually ruled in totality. This promise was confirmed to Yitzchak and to Yisrael with the further proviso of which we've already discussed. When the Bnei Yisrael were about to enter the land, God reiterated his promises, as recorded in Yahashua 1:4. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the great sea on the west. The land God gave Israel included everything from the Nile in Egypt to the Lebanon, north to south, and everything from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates River, west to east. This area includes all of the land modern Israel currently possesses, plus all the land currently claimed by the so-called Palestinian Arabs. Arabs, of course, from the Arabian Peninsula did not arrive until the time of Muhammad, 570 to 632 CE. Some of Egypt and Syria, all of Jordan, Lebanon, and some of what is now Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Under King Solomon, Israel occupied a large part, but not all, of the territory that God promised us. We expect that God's word will be fulfilled and that we will enter into our full inheritance in his time. Once again, here are the boundaries of the land God gave to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yisrael and their descendants forever. From the Red Sea in the south, in the region of Elat today, west to the Sea of the Philistines, the Mediterranean. The southern line was a point called the River of Egypt. Some say this is the Wadi of Egypt and not the Nile, but this really makes no sense. And on to the Great Sea, the Mediterranean, and east to the Euphrates River. Israel currently possesses only a fraction of the land God has promised, but one day all of the promised land will belong to us. God is faithful to all of his promises. Many promises made by God have already been fulfilled, as our people are being restored to our land from the four corners of the earth. Others are being fulfilled on a daily basis as the desert blossoms and Israel experiences great success in many areas of endeavor. But all the promises made to Yisrael will find fruition in the not-too-distant future when King Mashiach will return to reign from his eternal throne in Jerusalem over a fully realized Israel. This is what we read in the book of one of the 12, Sephirot Ovadiah. The house of Yaakov will repossess their rightful inheritance. The house of Yaakov will be a fire, and the house of Yosef a flame, setting aflame and consuming the stubble, which is the house of Esau. None of the house of Esau will remain, for Adonai has spoken. Those in the Negev will repossess the mountain of Esau, and those in the Shephelah, the land of the Plishtim, the Philistines. They will repossess the field of Ephraim, the field of Shomron, and Benjamin will occupy Gilead. Those from this army of the people of Israel exiled among the Canaanim as far away as Sarfat, and the exiles from Jerusalem and Sepharad, that's Spain, will repossess the cities in the Negev. Then the victorious will ascend Mount Zion to rule over Mount Esau, but the kingship will belong to Adonai. The promises made to the people of Israel will be fulfilled because our God has promised this. He is changeless. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And what he says will come to pass. I hope you have a good Shabbat and a blessed week and blessings in the new secular year. God bless you now.